Hey, Limitless fam. So, wanted to share a Devo thought today that ties together some of those things that we were talking about previously on Sunday. Because on Sunday, we were talking about how the apostles, the disciples, they were waiting for that promise that God was going to send. And we were challenging each other to take a moment and talk to God about things that we are waiting on and not to lose hope, not to lose faith, not to lose expectation, but to continue to wait with hope and faith and expectation. And I saw this scene in Genesis, or I read this scene in Genesis. I saw it in my mind's eye, in my imagination. But I read this scene in Genesis where Abraham prays for Abimelech, a king, for his home, for his household, and his servants because they were unable to have kids. And what's interesting is that this them being unable to have kids was actually because of Abraham. That's a whole nother story. But but tying into that, Abraham up to this point has been unable to have kids with Sarah, his wife. They actually went about a different route and he took on another wife and had kids. But God said, no, Sarah is going to have this kid through whom your descendants will be named. And what's interesting is that this hasn't happened, but Abraham prays for Abimelech and their household, and they're healed of this being unable to have kids, while Sarah still has not had hers. And they've been, going about this for a decade now, over 10 years, where Abraham was told his kids would inherit this land. It was a promise given to him by God, and Sarah was still not having kids. And it's interesting because as we're talking about this idea of waiting with hope, faith, anticipation, expectation of God moving, we also have this blessed rhythm that we talk about, beginning with prayer, listening to others, eating with them, serving them, and sharing the gospel. This is a rhythm of life that we can live to be a blessing to our communities and be a blessing to those God has brought us into contact with, those people, those places, those problems that He's placed on your heart. Well, beginning with prayer, and in this idea of we're waiting in prayer, we're waiting in worship, we're waiting with hope and faith for these promises that we're looking to God for these things that we're praying to Him for. I also want to challenge you to pray for those things for others as well. Abraham was waiting in a moment, a season of prayer, faith, expectation for Sarah to have kids. And during this time, God calls him to pray for someone else's household. They hadn't even received that blessing yet, Abraham and Sarah. Not physically at least. God told them it would happen, but they hadn't received it yet physically. But yet Abraham prayed for others to have that same thing. So don't let this idea of you can't give what you don't have, don't let that keep you from praying for healing for others, even if there's areas in your life that you haven't experienced healing. Praying for salvation for other people's family members, even though there's people in your family that you're still praying for their salvation. Not and praying for provision and blessing and favor over others, even if you feel like you haven't received that blessing, provision, and favor that you're praying over your own life. Pray that for others as well, and see those blessings come to pass. Be a blessing to them in that way, and know that you can do that. We see that with Abraham. And maybe there's also another challenge that we can see in him is that even though he hadn't physically received it, he believed it was his. He believed it because God told it to him. And that's why it was accounted to him as righteousness, right? Because he believed what God said, even if it hadn't come true yet. And so either way you want to see that, whether he received it in faith and was sharing it through them, through that, or he was able to still pray that blessing over others, even though he hadn't received it, because it's God who does the blessing, and He is the one who has all these things and more. All right, love you guys. Just a good something to chew on there from Abraham to encourage us as we pray for others.